welcome. This is the pre, intra, and post-workout nutrition webinar with Tiffany and me from SNS. For those of you joining live, thank you. For those of you who are watching this 50 years in the future when the robots have taken over, we appreciate you as well. So this is a Q&A webinar, so we have some questions that have been submitted online, mostly through Instagram, and we'll go through those. I also asked Tiffany to prepare kind of like her top 3 questions that she gets most often. And we'll also take, I know there's a couple questions that Nikhil has who's in the audience. We'll take some questions from whoever's here and whoever kind of comes in throughout the next, I don't know, 45 minutes. Yeah, welcome. Maybe we'll start with you, Tiffany, giving me a little overview of your background and your kind of domain specialty.
Sure. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks, Jordan. So yeah, I can start off with just like a little introduction about myself and then how I got involved with powerlifting, where I am present day, and kind of what keeps me still in the sport, even though I'm not competing anymore. So became a dietitian in 2017. I competed in my first powerlifting meet when I was a sophomore in college. So I think that was like 2013, 2014. And at first I loved it. I loved it, right? Getting strong. I ran in high school. I was super into cardio, right? As I feel like a lot of people are initially when they start their fitness journey. And then I realized how cool it was to be strong. So I continued to do it and competed for the first time. And after that, I just started training, training on a powerlifting program, competed in nationals in 2017. And I think at that time, and I was kind of telling Jordan this when we had first had our discussion together, that I think 2017 was maybe the time where people just started powerlifting. And people will tell me that kind of downplay myself. I was able to rank, that's my little humble brag. I was able to rank top 5 in my weight class and age at the time in the 57 kilo class. So it felt like a big deal to me. But I feel like now that the sport it's amazing how popular it's grown and how much people gravitate towards it naturally now. So the competition is definitely there, which is really great to witness. But during that time, as I was powerlifting, I did notice that, just competing with my friends, competing actually on a team, and just being more familiar with the individuals in the sports, and I really realized that there was a bit of a gap when it came to nutrition. I unfortunately, being a witness to my friends not doing well with their competitions due to not cutting weight properly and using drastic weight, measures to get to their weight class and not eating properly during their prep. It made me upset, right? Naturally, but most of all, and most importantly, it motivated me to want to see better for the people around me, right? And ultimately to see, more improvements in the sport in general. Because when it comes to nutrition, I think that when it comes to powerlifting, I think nutrition has such a key role, and a lot of people tend to, of course, that happens naturally where people gravitate towards lifting and just wanting to, be consistent with their training, and then they get to that level of nutrition, or that understanding that, okay, how do I take this to the next level? And that's where nutrition comes into play. So I'm happy to continue, being involved in the sport as not an individual that competes anymore, but all my, serving a population that primarily does, and strength athletes in general. So I do have some individuals who do weightlifting, some CrossFitters, but my heart's definitely for my powerlifters out there. Present day, I do consulting on the side, but I also work full time for Exos, which is a sports performance company. If anyone's familiar with it, I work in corporate wellness in the Midtown location here. A really great and rewarding job. So I like to do that. And then I like to work for, myself on the side to make sure that I stay up to date with everything powerlifting, but also making sure that I'm improving my counseling practices and whatnot.
Awesome. Appreciate it. It's interesting. The questions, if you read them all, they all kind of have similarity in that they are curious about performance, right? The people who ask questions, they want to know how they can perform better. And it's so different than diet in the traditional sense, where people want to lose weight or they want to appear a certain way. And what's cool about that, and you kind of alluded to a little bit, is people are always getting better. They're always getting stronger. The sport of powerlifting has exploded. People are getting a lot more skilled. And I think diet is one of those places that the average hobby powerlifter has not fully optimized, right? I mean, there is no such thing as fully optimized, but they haven't put in the effort that they could to get the outcomes that are significant. You see, as the sport gets bigger, Ray Williams was the first person to squat 1,000 pounds raw. And as soon as he did that, 1,000 pounds started falling everywhere. Eddie Hall pulled 500 kilos, and then Thor came and pulled 501 after that. And now there's all these races to beat that. An interesting analogy, I was snorkeling this past weekend, and I would dive down like 10 feet. And as soon as I dived down 10 feet, my ears started to hurt. Like you could feel the pressure. And I was like, all right, well, I guess, yeah, it takes practice. You got to snorkel a lot. You got to dive a lot to get lower than 10 feet. And then I saw a diver with, oxygen, and they were way lower than I am. And I thought to myself, there's nothing protecting their ears. How are they doing it? And then within a few moments, I thought, oh, well, there must be a way for me to do it. Oh, I think we dropped her. Well, let me finish my diatribe here for those who are listening. I figured there's got to be a way for me to do it. And so within a few minutes, I just figured it out. I just got to equalize. I'll wait for Tiffany to join again.
Huh, I seem to have gotten kicked off. Was it just me, or?
I think it was just you.
Oh no.
It's
Okay,
all good.
sorry about that.
We're only gone for a moment. So just to finish up my little my thought that I had that I was so excited about over the weekend. But I was snorkeling. I couldn't go lower than 10 feet. I saw a diver like 30 feet down with no ear protection, and it just made me realize there is a way to do it better, and I just don't know what it was. And within a few minutes, I figured out I could equalize like I do on an airplane, and I was able to dive 30 feet, right, with a snorkel. I think the same thing applies here. Powerlifting is reaching new heights. People are getting much better. When those new heights are reached, people figure out there's something that I need to do to improve. It's clearly possible. And I think a lot of that possibility is in diet. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to have you on and answer these questions. So
yeah, stoked to be here. And yeah, just to conclude with that, your little story. Yeah, I and how wonderful is that, right? Being able to just be a witness, to be like, okay, like, wow, like how can I improve in this? Like, I'm new and fresh at this, right? And I think that is just a process of wanting to learn, develop, and grow, right? As an athlete, as a person, whatever it may be. Like, there's always that room for potential, for more of a potential and improved growth, and that's a wonderful thing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's my favorite thing about this sport. There's always potential for improvement. Right. So
Yeah.
let's go ahead and get started with your most common question. So what do you think people are dying to learn about the most? Questions that they really want to get answered?
Yeah. I love that you started off with that, because I actually, like, when I was going through your list of questions, I was like, some of these, like, I had the like a few questions I had in mind. Like, definitely protein was one of them, right? Just like how much protein in general, et cetera. And then I was looking at this list and I was like, wow, there's a lot of these questions I would consider like they would be like top questions I get very, very often. But protein definitely one of them. So maybe we can start there.
Yeah, let's dive in. So we could do here's the protein question. How much protein is good for men and women per pound of body weight? At what point is it overkill?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the protein question, just because there's so much debate and controversy when it comes to protein, right? Generally, like what we know, right, when it comes to protein recommendations is that the more intense our activity is, our physical activity or sport is, the more physically demanding it is, and the more energy demanding it is. So, we're burning a lot of calories at once. The more protein that we'll need, right? But it's sometimes, right, not as simple as that. One interesting thing that I like to point out, right, before even talking about protein when it comes to sport, is that the dietary recommendations for protein for like the general population is very low. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I've read that before. It seems pretty low.
Yeah, it's pretty low. I want to say I don't even, not that I don't, this may be like, like a bad representation of like of exactly like what the guidelines that I go through, but I don't even pay attention to it just because they're so low, right? I think it's anywhere from 0.8 grams per pound of body weight, right? So that's the general recommendation for Americans. And really the reason why I don't pay too much attention to it is because I do, not that I don't think that we're in just average individuals are in a state of not having enough protein, but I do think that it's just grossly underestimated, right? A lot of us are physically active, and the our standard diets are not that protein focused, even if we're not physically active. A lot of people don't understand the importance of protein. So I like to follow a few guidelines when it comes to protein, and it really is just thinking about how physically demanding your sport is. So as powerlifters, our sport is physically demanding in the sense that you're working out for a longer period of time, but it's not that intense as compared to like an endurance trainer, right? Like our triathlete. So the needs are actually lower. I would recommend anywhere from 1.1 grams to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So the reason why there's such a huge gap, and that's just for men and women, and the reason why there's that gap is because it really depends on where you are in your sport, right? So, or where you are in your training. So if you're typically, on a cut, or your caloric, you're on a caloric deficit, I would recommend your protein intake to be a bit higher, right? So if your training is, you're in a hypertrophy phase, I would recommend the protein to be a bit higher too, right? And so those purposes are just to make sure that you're recovering well, and that you're promoting that muscle growth even under conditions that naturally would want you to be in more of a catabolic state.
And what about the overkill part of the question? Is there too much protein?
So there's typically not too much protein unless you're an individual with some type of kidney malfunction or disease, right? I think, however, with that being said, that's the answer you would get from most people. But I would say if reaching your protein goals is taking away from the overall quality of your diet, if it's making it hard to hit your macros, if it's making it hard to reach your calorie goals, and you feel overexerted by having too much protein, then that's where it can be overkill. So we're also talking about diet quality, not just diet quantity. So oftentimes when it comes to having too much protein, it can be really daunting, right? Just generally speaking, if you're consuming way too much protein to the point where it's kind of making you divert from your actual like plan, right? Your macronutrient recommendations, whatever it may be, then that's where I could say, okay, let's try and see if we can make room for, some carbs and maybe some fats. And that way the overall diet quality will improve, and you're most likely to stay on a consistent eating plan.
Now, again, I spoke a little bit about this before the edit that we're going to make to start this video, but I come from a long history of trying to gain weight. And so it seems to me as well, when I've tried to eat a lot of protein, it's also like an opportunity cost thing. I don't know if that's something that you agree with or disagree with. I mean, protein is satiating, right? And when I have a lot of sliced turkey, for example, it's hard for me to eat more of it. For me, maybe that's taking place of like a more calorically dense, fatty food, right? I mean, is that something you would agree with?
Yeah, great question about that. So yes, right. So that kind of, that's like a blend of like, okay, like diet quality and like quantity, right? So like protein itself is a very fulfilling macronutrient. Having too much of it can be, obviously you're overly full, and that can affect the ability to just increase your total calories, right? So if you're an individual that wants to gain weight, and gaining weight is your primary goal, and you find that reaching your protein goals is a bit overwhelming and you may miss on the total calorie goal consistently over like a period of time, then I want to say, okay, let's see if we could bump that protein down, bring your carb and fat macronutrients up, and see if that can kind of balance things out a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Yeah, I think that answers that question. Here's another one for you. And this is, I think, kind of the highest level, I guess, most generally appealing question. What are the main supplements you would recommend for a powerlifter?
Yeah, that's a good one. I love that one. So there's another question that's similar to that. Like, are there any contenders for effective supplements besides whey, caffeine, and creatine? So maybe we can like combine them both.
Yeah, let's combine.
Yeah, so generally speaking, I definitely would recommend like a protein powder. Definitely would recommend creatine, and definitely creatine and caffeine. If I had to make a couple other suggestions, I think beta alanine can be really helpful. And I also think that some form of electrolytes can be helpful, especially if you are on a cut or you're training for, on a cut for like an extended period of time, or you're getting close to like competition time where you're training with higher higher load, and or even I guess just even in the beginning. So like as an intro workout, I really like electrolytes. Generally I would recommend it, definitely recommend it for those who are on a caloric deficit.
Awesome. And I guess in the vein of the second question, are there any new contenders for effective supplement in the same class as whey, caffeine, or creatine? Is there anything that you know of, maybe in the recent history, 5-10 years, that can actually improve performance, like maybe directly correlated to improved strength or endurance or things like that?
I would say that there's nothing new that we don't know, right? I think if you hit the nail on all three and you're consistent with your intake of having a protein powder, you're consistent and able to dose your caffeine properly in order to optimize your workout, and you're consistent with your creatine and you're a respondent to creatine, then you're pretty much like golden, right? I recommend, like I mentioned beta alanine as a good supplement, just because when you're training, especially if you're training in a hypertrophy phase, right? Beta alanine basically works to block lactic acid buildup, right? So it basically acts as like a precursor. It can kind of delay that muscle fatigue. And so just similar concept thing to creatine, but not in the sense that you need that whole loading and phase to actually occur. It's instantaneous. You can kind of delay that fatigue, right? And obviously if we delay muscle fatigue, we can probably, work out more efficiently and push out like a cleaner rep. So I would say beta alanine would be like maybe my last supplement. I had to make a recommendation, but there's nothing really that new and exciting in the as far as the supplement world. I think those three are amazing as is, if you can, be consistent with the intake of them.
Well, that's good to know. I have one of those browser plugins that tells me if there's any coupon codes when I check out. And if there's not, it tells me, good, now you know that you didn't miss out on any savings, right? So it's the same thing here. No, there might not be any new supplements that improve performance, but at least I know I'm not missing out on anything.
Right.
So, here's another one. But you know what, before I get to this, I want to poke on something you mentioned, the loading phase for creatine. I think it's often misunderstood, potentially simple, potentially not. Maybe you can kind of go over your opinions on it.
Oh, sure. So, is the loading phase necessary when it comes to creatine supplementation?
I guess more specifically, is it necessary? Is there a simple version? Is there a more complex version?
Mm-hmm. So it depends. I feel like I started off every answer like that. Well, I say it depends because it really does depend on exactly what you want to use creatine for in your training cycle, right? So if you are someone that wants to take creatine consistently, you may be starting off in a program, you generally just want to use it effectively as a supplement, then really, loading really isn't necessary. We don't really see any benefits with loading. However, if you're an individual that wants to optimize creatine supplementation during maybe like closer to competition time, that can be helpful, right? And making weight isn't an issue. That's where creatine can actually shine, right? So you can and if you're on like a time constraint, right? Like let's say you get off creatine and then for whatever reason you're not consistent with it, and then you want to use creatine again towards the end of your training, that's where it can be helpful, right? Leading into your meet and making weight isn't an issue. So at the end of the day, I think if I had to make a recommendation, I would just say, just supplement with creatine as is. The loading phase really isn't that necessary unless you're like on a true time constraint. But if you can plan things out strategically, you really shouldn't be.
Got it. And so I think that loading phase is to is to increase your blood creatinine levels. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
And so what you're saying is you take it long enough duration, those levels will get up there, right?
Yeah, it basically reaches, yeah, so it can saturate it up quick, like in a quicker time frame.
Mm.
But okay, with that being said, creatine loading phases can come with some small side effects, right? And that's generally why I don't recommend it. And like, sorry, I didn't mention that earlier, but those who do load with creatine, they may find that they go through just like, you know, some simple like GI digestive issues, right? So more like stomach cramps, like you know, there could be like more bloating, and that can ultimately interfere with your training, right? So we're always thinking about like trying to optimize as much as we can. And if we're running the risk of like having like any GI issues, I would say let's stay away from it, right? Let's just avoid that completely. That can stay true to especially those who are not like good with their hydration and their water intake.
That makes a lot of sense. In fact, I've had some GI issues from the loading phase of creatine, so it's kind of a relief to hear that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, it's. I feel like as you get older, supplements they all have some weird impact. I mean, I don't take whey protein anymore for a similar reason. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I'll have a shake every once in a while, but when I do it every day, it's going to impact my stomach, and so I treat it more as like a, you know, after a really hard workout, you know.
Yeah.
I
Whey
don't know if that's
protein can, I mean, a lot of people can be intolerant to whey protein in general. Right. It's just because it's a liquid and a lot of people are intolerant to dairy. So that's where you can run into some issues. So, I mean, you can, if you're someone that is intolerant to dairy in general, you can always opt for like a soy protein isolate. The amino acid profile is equivalent. The bioavailability of the amino acids in there is somewhat equivalent to whey protein. So that would be like a second best option.
Very good. Oh, we got a question here that was just submitted. What are the main supplements you would suggest for a competitive cyclist? It just disappeared on me. Yeah.
Okay, a competitive. What are the main supplements I would recommend for competitive cyclists?
Yeah. Road cyclists under
Okay.
23 category.
And what was that?
Under 23 category, so young road cyclist.
Oh, okay. So I would say, so I mean, still sticking to the idea that like those three supplements, I mean, those three supplements in general are really good for all sports, right? So like whey, caffeine, creatine. Definitely if you're cycling, you'll want to consider having some form of electrolytes, right? You're sweating at a profuse rate. So you want to make sure you replenish your electrolytes so you're feeling optimized and hydrated throughout your workout. We notice that if we are at least like even 5%, or 5% sweat loss can even impact your performance. So definitely having those electrolytes during your workout can definitely be helpful. And with that being said, right, maybe having, and this is not, I don't want to say it's like taboo, but I think a lot of people are still kind of like coming to it, but having beet powder in the form of like a juice or just powder in general. It can boost nitric oxide. Basically, in layman's terms, it can kind of just make the blood in your body a bit thinner, so then your muscles can work at a more effective rate, a more efficient rate. So the muscles can kind of flow a bit better, and if you supplement with it on a consistent time period, you'll get those effects over time.
And from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of people think of creatine and think of strength training or bodybuilding, but I believe the most common use case in creatine is cardiovascular conditioning, like long endurance running. Is that correct?
Yeah. Creatine actually has some really amazing effects, if not more, for endurance athletes. Yeah. I think the reason why we associate like creatine with strength athletes exclusively is because like creatine is so focused on like muscle building, right? But other sports are very muscle demanding too. So yeah, we actually know that like creatine can be really effective for like runners, like those who run marathons, triathletes, cyclists for sure. Also, creatine has a great effect on general population. can improve like cognitive like health, memory, cognitive function for like older adults specifically. So we're learning a lot about creatine, more so than we have known in the past.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I don't know where the public perception came from, but maybe because, you're young, you start going to the gym and you want to improve, you do creatine. There's a lot of those people out there because there are very few things in life where the powerlifting perspective or the strength training perspective takes precedence over like a perspective, because it's the vast majority of the population, they choose to run for exercise over strength training.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say like the poor perception can just be the misinformation online, right? Creatine's a steroid. I still get that information even from like personal trainers. So it can be tough to kind of dispel that, but I think it also comes from some poor studies that have been glorified in the media that pertain to like those who supplemented with creatine. They were like not hydrated well enough, and then they end up in the hospital. So those tend to get more traction than the actual benefit, the actual population that's benefiting from it. So, but we love creatine here. Creatine's great.
Creatine. Next question, and this is kind of in the same vein as the protein question. How many carbs are best for pre, intra, and post workout? So level of carb.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say when it comes to exactly paying attention to what those percentages look like, it's most important to consider that you're not sacrificing like what your breakfast looks like, right, or what your dinner looks like, or wherever you may train, to just ensure you have the most amount of carbs before and after workout, right? We want to optimize carbohydrates before and after workout, and during workout, if it's necessary, if we deem it necessary, but we certainly don't want to let that override the factor that we want to make sure that we have fulfilling meals throughout. But I would say, as a general rule of thumb, at least like 20% as a pre-workout, 10% intra-workout, 20% post-workout, the same. Keeps things nice and simple, allows us to stay more consistent, and they're well-rounded numbers. So people typically have a better vision of exactly how many grams they should be aiming for. So anywhere from the 20% would be like in that last mini meal or snack, right? The 10% can come from during the intra workout, can come from some form of carbohydrate drink or gummies, things like that. And then post workout, keeping it the same at 20%.
And so that's percentage of your total daily intake of carbs, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So what you're suggesting is half of your carbs either between before and after your workout.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know it sounds more dramatic, right? When you think about it, when you look at it that way. But certainly the reason why it's so important, especially for powerlifters, is because we're training for a long period of time, right? Like not similar to like the general population, like, training for maybe 30 minutes, an hour. You're in the gym for at least, 3 hours, at most. And then you have to think about digestion and things like that. So just making sure that you stay within those numbers can help you probably optimize your workout the most efficiently.
Yeah, and it sounds like a lot, but when you think about it, let's say you have 150 grams of carbs in a day, 75 grams of carbs from the meal you have before your workout to whatever you consume during your workout, and the meal you have after. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, in fact,
Mm-hmm.
to have 75 grams of carbs outside of that, it seems like kind of a lot. So the more you think about it, the more it starts to make sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. I think that settles the how many carbs question. The next question, this is a poop related question, which, poop is important for diet and nutrition, right? So is poop a reliable indicator of fiber intake, or is it more complex than that?
Yeah, that was one of my favorite questions. So yeah, I would
That was
say
my number 2 favorite question.
I would say, I wouldn't say it should be the only reliable indicator, right? Because everyone's bowel movements are really different, right? Especially if you're someone that has some form of gastrointestinal condition, right? If you have IBS or you have, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, things like that, pooping and like the amount of times that you poop and use the bathroom will look different, right? And that may not be solely solely relied on the amount of fiber you're having, right? So for the normal individual, average healthy individual who maybe doesn't have any type of GI condition, it can be a good indicator of, okay, am I having enough protein? But definitely making sure that you review other things over time as you get older would allow you to make sure that your fiber intake is high enough, right? So one thing that fiber intake can really do is actually improve like our cholesterol and our blood pressure. So a lot of us don't know that because not say that a lot of us don't know that, but it's not the primary thing that we're looking for when we're thinking about fiber, right? But there is a lot of research that says that it can improve your cholesterol and your blood pressure, and definitely stabilize your blood sugar levels. So those are things to look at over time. And if you have an adequate amount of fiber throughout the day, those numbers tend to typically look pretty good.
And what about fiber supplementation for strength athletes? Like, is there a certain level that you recommend, or is it a supplement that you think is useful for strength athletes particularly?
When it comes to fiber intake?
Yeah, fiber intake.
So generally, I've never actually recommended a fiber supplement to individuals. It's very rare that I do because there's so many benefits that comes from getting fiber from whole foods that we don't want to miss the ball on, right? Fiber rich foods, tend to be primarily fruits, vegetables, legumes, our nuts, our seeds, grains, things like that. And they can provide us so many more nutrients than a supplement, right? If it's really, really hard to get that variety in your diet, right, then a supplement can be helpful. I would just make sure that you're paying attention to what your micronutrient intake looks like too, right? Because we're getting vitamins and we're getting minerals in those other whole foods. In addition, and we're getting that fiber intake. So if we can, get the best of both worlds, try to aim for the whole food sources. And really, it's all about following gentle guidelines, right? 2 to 3 servings of fruit a day, 4 to 5 servings of vegetables a day, which I know can seem like a lot, but you can double up or you can start off early in your day. And then just consistently aiming for snacks that are rich in fiber throughout the day can really help.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And I guess, would you suggest a certain amount of just general fiber intake for strength athletes, or I guess not a specific amount, but is reaching a certain level of fiber intake beneficial for a strength athlete? Is there a level where if you're below it, you could have detrimental effects to your strength training?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't know of any research that points towards to either direction, like having too much fiber, like too less fiber. What we do know is that, if you're someone that doesn't get enough fiber in your diet, your overall diet quality can be pretty low, right? So that can show up in so many other ways. But I haven't heard specifically that like the correlation between fiber intake and strength athlete. Is there something that you've heard of, or maybe something that you're thinking of?
No, I mean, I was seeing if there was any more detail to this question, but I guess if I was to think about it, there was a time where a group of people at the gym were hopping on the fiber train, and I think it was more about people who were trying to gain weight, just modify their weight, trying to correct for dietary imbalances, right? And I guess that could be, and that could, we're all friends here. That could present itself in accidents happening maybe during heavy lifting, which people talk about all the time. And I don't know
Sure.
if there's some sort of correlation there. If somebody's having an issue with that, and people have all kinds of private issues that they maybe don't want to submit questions about.
Sure.
Fiber supplementation could be helpful for a strength athlete in that regard.
Yeah, I love the correlation there. There's a relationship there, right? There's a relationship there. So yeah, I would say when it comes to fiber intake in general, right? Only 10% of Americans are getting enough. And this is data that's been for maybe 20 years. In the last 20 years, we've noticed that Americans are not getting enough fiber. And that's just because a lot of our foods generally don't contain too much of it. we're eating a lot of refined grains. We're not eating enough fruits and vegetables. And so, we're not typically getting enough fiber throughout the day. So I think everyone can benefit from just paying attention to their fiber more. It's not something a lot of people do, not especially not a lot of like powerlifting athletes, not stereotype, but a lot of us are worried about macronutrients, right? Not micronutrients. And a lot of our fiber rich foods have all those micronutrients that are really important to pay attention to. The only thing when it comes to like fiber intake, right, for any athlete is just to make sure that you're not getting too much before your training, and maybe not having too much after, right? And like I don't want to say like give specific amounts, because really it varies from individual to individual. But just generally speaking, having a bit of fiber before training can cause your stomach to bloat. Maybe obviously fiber rich foods will make it harder to digest, so it can delay gastric emptying. So maybe not having too much fiber rich foods prior to in that meal or snack prior to training will be important. And also after, right? Because after we're training, what we want to do is to make sure that we're optimizing our nutrition and not really delaying that gastric emptying. So we're recovering as fast as we can with the foods that we're eating. So if we're prioritizing a bit of fiber after our training, it can just make things run a bit slower. But it's it's all relative. And I would say when it comes down to it, I would worry more about making sure that you get enough fiber throughout the day.
Makes sense. I think it's on fiber. So this is a question that came up in the pre-talk. So I'm curious, this is a question for me, your take on water loading.
Just my general opinion about water loading?
Yeah, I'll let you kind of go where you want with it. Just what's your take on it? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Do you have a protocol? Whatever.
Yeah. So water loading, right, is obviously, I think, the gold standard for any weight-based sport, right? It is the technique and technique that most people will use to make sure that they can train at their most optimal weight, right, to still be strong during training and then go into their competition without feeling overly depleted, right? But what happens often is that there's a lot of room for error when it comes to water loading, right? And I think that it's one of those things that's like, hey, it's high risk, high reward. And naturally there are people who may not respond to water loads as effectively, right? It really depends on the individual, and it really takes a lot of trial and error. I like I mentioned to you earlier, I would definitely use water loading as one of the last resorts when it comes to making weight, right? If you're an individual that doesn't, maybe you've water loaded in the past, and it was hard for just the whole process was maybe just more grueling than you intended it to be. Maybe, I would say the next time you think about competition, think about other methods if you haven't used them, right? So it's effective if you are close to weight, but also if you're, anywhere like 5 pounds up, right? Generally speaking, when it comes to making weight, I would always suggest to be really realistic with exactly how much weight you can lose in an effective manner without overly depleting yourself to the point where competition will be just mentally and physically exhausting. So I tend to do a combination of gut manipulation before anything, right? Gut manipulation, just generally reviewing what liquids look like and what your food intake looks like, the actual bulk of your foods, and then use water load as a last resort. After water loading, it'd probably be like sweating, but we try not to get there.
I want to ask more about gut manipulation. That's not something I'm familiar with. But before we do that, maybe we should mention maybe what water loading is in the first place, and a quick protocol to get whoever might be listening on board with what we're talking about. I probably should have prefaced that in the beginning.
Sure. Yeah. So water loading would be considered an acute way to lose weight effectively, right? So basically what you're doing is that ideally you're consuming on average a pretty consistent amount of water. So that's for before you even start a load. And the water load process basically starts off with just increasing the amount of water that you're drinking over it really depends on exactly how how much weight you are trying to cut effectively, or, water weight you're trying to cut effectively. But you're drinking a copious amounts of water to increase certain hormones in your body, to then cut off water dramatically. And then those hormones continue reproducing urine. So you're urinating, even when you stop water intake. And so what happens is when you urinate, you will, lose your water weight, and you're able to make weight effectively. So water load process usually would be, anywhere from, it could be like three to like 5 days. Some people may do longer, some people may do shorter, but it really depends on exactly what the timeline of like competition looks like for you. And then usually on the day before competition, at a certain time, you cut off your water intake, and then you just continue to urinate throughout the day. Your hormone is still on, it's triggered, and by the time you're able to make weight, like, you should be able to effectively have lost the amount of water you've consumed and more.
So back to the gut manipulation. So this is a technique of manipulating body weight, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So explain that more. I don't think I've heard of that.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. So gut manipulation is really thinking about the amount of food weight that's in your body, right? So when we consume foods, we ideally obviously digest it, right? Over like starting from like 2 to 4 hours, and really are able to digest foods. But there is bulk, right, in our stomachs. It doesn't just dissipate into nothingness, right? There is weight that comes with it, even if it's metabolized. So when we are able to make sure that the amount of food weight is decreased in our stomachs, then we tend to actually carry less water in general. So you're carrying less water, there's less food weight in your stomachs, and you're able to get closer to your competition weight. So it really is just a method of typically decreasing your fiber intake to anywhere from like 5 grams 2 or 3 days before. And then also considering the fact that you want to gravitate towards more liquid meals, 1 day out before competition at most.
Yeah, I think intuitively, I have a background in wrestling before powerlifting, so I've done a lot of weight manipulation. So intuitively, you think to yourself, I'm not going to have a steak, the day before a meet, but I think the idea, taking that concept further and thinking, how can I manipulate my gut so I have less, as you say, bulk when I go step on a scale, it's fascinating. And I wish we could talk a little bit more about it, but we're going to come up on a time limit soon, and we have a few more questions. I know Nikhil has been hanging back, wanting to ask a question, so let's get that one in.
Yeah, so my question was about reverse dieting and kind of where it could be useful, or like how one would do it, just whatever I think. Reverse dieting and powerlifting, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, that's a great question, Nikki. Am I pronouncing that right? Nikki? Nikhil?
Nikhil,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, wonderful name. Yeah. Okay. So reverse dieting can be effective. It can be an effective tool for any athlete, right? But definitely for athletes that are in a weight-based sport. So really the approach to reverse dieting is making sure that, or the primary goal is making sure that you're staying at maintenance weight for a long extended period of time, or as much as you possibly can, while increasing your calories in a gradual manner. And really the goal there is to make sure that you're eating enough, if not more, to optimize your training, feeling good from your workouts, recovering properly, while you're able to stay at somewhat of a relative similar weight from when you had started that initial reverse. There's so many great benefits of reverse. It teaches your body to get adjusted to an increase of calories in a gradual manner. So we keep the body fat low, and we are able to stabilize or increase our lean body mass, right? So there's benefits by just making sure that those things are stabilized, but also, it can help teach you just overall discipline in general, right? There's a lot of times where we'll come back from a cut, and it becomes very easy to just increase calories and eat an influx of calories, and then gain weight in a manner that's not gradual, right? So, doing it in a gradual manner allows you to stabilize a few things, but also it really opens the window for you being able to eat, obviously, a lot more food than you typically would. And that way that, obviously enhances your training and also enhances your overall health. Lots of benefits. The hardest part about reverse dieting is just sticking to it and being consistent with it.
Thank you. Yeah, that made a lot of sense.
I have
Yeah.
Hi. Sorry, just one question on top of that. So I was wondering, like, after a reverse diet, does that mean your maintenance calories are increased? How does that work? Like, does it help like change your metabolism or what?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I feel like we want that answer to be yes, right? If done in a gradual and very like a very gradual and sustainable manner, like that can definitely mean that you're able to maintain a weight with higher calories, and that can just overall mean, obviously that's good news for everybody, right? But it's oftentimes not as easy as that, because unfortunately everyone's metabolism is different, and a lot of us have experience with dieting in the past, which can kind of, that can have a role in how exactly fast our metabolism is or how effective it is. But really, primarily, it comes down to genetics, how well we respond, right? And how much we're able to maintain eating enough or eating a lot of an influx of calories and being able to maintain the same weight. If you're able to control the other variables, such as, obviously your training, your stress, your sleep, etc., then you should be able to, at least find some benefits from reverse dieting and be able to still maintain a relatively same weight by with eating a lot more calories than you're used to.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cool. We have a few more questions here, and I want to leave a few minutes for more questions from those who are listening here. So maybe we'll do like a lightning round. That sound good?
Yeah, let's do it.
And I unfortunately left some of the more complex questions for last, so it's going to be a highly complex lightning round, at least from my perspective. So this one may be a quick one. Any continuing myths about time frames with meals?
Any continuing myths? I guess yes and no. Nutrient timing is important, right? But it still only plays, maybe a 10% role in our overall diet quality. If you're thinking about losing weight, gaining weight, etc., I would say pay attention to overall calories then, and then think about timing. Still important, right, when it comes to training, but it's not as important maybe as we think it is. Yeah.
Right. So like, I guess in the framing of any continuing myths, you would say that most of the myths that are continuing, or most of the thoughts around the relevance of nutrient timing is myth. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say they're myths, but are they over exaggerated? Maybe. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool.
For
Great.
sure.
Calories in, calories out seems to be pretty straightforward for weight loss. Is it similarly straightforward for weight gain?
Great question. Yes. Right. To keep it simple, yes. And a lot of that just has to do with genetics, right? For if you're someone that has a slower metabolism, it's going to be harder for weight gain in general. If that's the case, definitely pay attention to making sure you're consistently hitting a caloric surplus, and really making sure that the activity that comes outside of your physical training is evaluated as well, right? So there's definitely more I think there's obviously a few more considerations to be made to make sure that you're staying in that consistent caloric surplus. But generally speaking, yeah, calories in and calories out would be the same.
All right. Last question here in the lightning round. If I'm cutting, how many grams of fat per pound of body weight should I aim for maintaining hormone function?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I generally go off just total calorie intake, right? At maintenance, and then kind of working from there. So I feel like a lot of people tend to really like low fat diets, or follow a low fat diet better, but I find that powerlifters that have at least 25 to 30% do pretty well following their diet regimen in general. But to maintain hormone function, if we're talking primarily about hormone function, it's more important for women to prioritize their fat intake, to have a bit more. Men can get away with anywhere from, maybe like 20s to 25. But definitely for women, definitely leaning on the 25 to 30% would be much more recommended.
So that would be like a floor you would recommend, somewhere around 25 to 30% for women.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, well, that was easy. These were not complex for you at all, it seems.
These are questions I get very, very often. And I enjoyed answering them all.
Yeah, so any more questions from those who are listening here? Nikhil, any more questions about reverse dieting that you might have after some of Tiffany's answers? I think that might be a no.
That's a great question indeed, though.
It was. Great. Well, if there are no more questions from the audience, then we could go ahead and wrap it up. Any parting thoughts, any takeaways, any things you'd like to highlight from what we've talked about?
I honestly think that we covered a good amount of traction, right? I guess really the main thing is, prioritize nutrition, be intentional with it, try it out. If it's something that you want to try and manipulate or take advantage of when it comes to your nutrition or with your training, try being intentional with your nutrition just for maybe a month's time, right? See how you're feeling with that month's time and then go from there. Because I think a lot of people can certainly benefit with just paying more attention to the nutrition, optimizing what their intake looks like, prior to training, during training, after, and that really can go a long way. So definitely, it can be hard to change eating habits, right? Because eating is, we eat every couple hours, every few hours, and we're really only just training like one period of our day, right? So making the right choices can always be hard, but it doesn't have to be perfect. There just needs to be a bit more intention with it, and I think that'll go a long way.
Got it. And if we're to challenge those who are listening to be intentional with their eating for a month, what would that look like? Tracking macros or something else, maybe a little bit less, I don't know, tracking oriented?
Yeah, that's I love that. So not necessarily, you don't have to track, right? Really depends on what your goal is, right? I love to encourage anybody, regardless of what your goal is, to just aim for a few basics, right? And it doesn't have to be powerlifting oriented, but it could just be overall health oriented, right? Like, okay, are you drinking enough water? Are you well hydrated? How often are you actually drinking enough water throughout the week, right? Okay, are you getting protein with each meal? Are you getting enough fiber, right? Fruits and vegetables. Are you eating every few hours? So those are just like a few simple basics that people can try to be more intentional with. And I know even just, being able to achieve all those 3 or 4 that listed can be quite tough to stay consistent with. So I would encourage, people to start off from there and then, dive into the more complicated stuff when it comes to nutrition.
Awesome. And we'll be sharing this talk online. We'll be emailing it out to our members and to people who might be members in the future. And so how could these people have a reliable place to reach you? What's your favorite place for people to DM you or email you or whatever? Where should they go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say Instagram. Instagram is my most used social media platform. You guys can follow me at Tiffany Ma _RDN. Or you can, find me on my website if you really want to contact me. That's TiffanyMaRDN.com. Or you can also email me, and that's tma@TiffanyMaRDN.com. But Instagram is definitely the most effective form of communication for me.
Instagram is king, as usual. That's taking place these days.
Yeah, hasn't changed for a while now.
All right, great. Well, this was awesome. I learned a lot, and
Yay.
but I'm a diet schlub, so hopefully that means everybody else learned a lot as well.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jordan. I had a great time, and I look forward to maybe potentially having more discussions like this in the future.
Absolutely, great. Thanks for coming and thanks for talking to us.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
having me.
This was
Bye.
awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
Thank
Bye.